And so I think I'm going to start with a bit of a demo so you can see what this does. And so OpenInfraQuote is a CLI tool that reads your Terraform plan and state files, and then it gives you a quote of how much that will cost you that month. So it's really useful to keep your cloud costs in line. And it's brand new. It just said release V1 about 30 minutes ago. So let's see a little demo of how it works, and then we'll switch over to a presentation to get more in-depth in there. So using local stack, I have this repository with my Terraform code in it. We're going to initiate it. I'm just pulling down all my Terraform stuff, and then let's do a plan. So we'll create a plan from what is in this directory and output it to a plan file. And because we're using local stack, that will happen pretty quickly. And then we'll output that to a JSON file, because OpenInfraQuote reads in the JSON representation of a plan and a state file because that's more stable. And then let's run it. Get that. So this is what an experience will look like. You feed it in your plan JSON and you'll get your monthly summary here. So in this case, we can see the minimum price of that month will be $127 and the maximum price will be $187. And then because this is a plan, we also see the difference. So every resource in this plan is new. So we can see the difference is the same as the total. But if we had an existing state file and then a plan that, say, added one resource to it, you would see the total, and then the difference would be how much that change added or subtracted from that total. And down here, we can see the breakdown between our different resources, their name, what type they are, how much their minimum and maximum price is, and then what kind of change it was. So in this case, all of them are adds. We can also see JSON representation, which is really handy because then we can take this and we can feed it into something like OPA in order to put a limit on how much we can spend per month or how large a change can be or what types of resources are allowed. So we can see all that information is present here. So that's a little demo of showing how OpenInfraQuote works. So I'll switch over to presentation. One second. Great. So what is OpenInfraQuote? Well, as we said, it's open source, entirely open source CLI for Terraform cost estimation. And the reason we're making this at Terrateam is we manage your infrastructure or help you manage your infrastructure. And so that means we manage the plans and applies. And for a lot of people, seeing the price of a change, it's kind of the aha moment of what the value is in putting their infrastructure management into a GitOps workflow or any sort of really structured workflow. Not only can they see the change, but they can also track it over time. And previously, we've depended on other tools, but we've decided that this is an important enough tool that we should build our own. And also, it's something we think that should be free. So we want to give the tool we made away for free. So that's why it's open source. It's under an MPL license. And OpenInfraQuote is really focused on just pricing. So being an open source tool, we wanted to make it something we felt comfortable we could manage in the long term. So we've really narrowed the scope of what it does to just a pricing problem. So OpenInfraQuote doesn't directly come with any sort of policy management or RBAC or anything like that that is like a larger InfraQuote tool might have. It's really focused on just the pricing problem. So as we saw, the inputs here are your JSON representation of your plan or state. You can think of that what to price is the first input. The second input is our pricing sheet, which is a CSV file, and that defines how to match your resources to something that can be priced. And then finally, a usage file. One comes built in with OpenInfraQuote, but you can always add one yourself. And that says, for example, in S3 bucket, I generally do this many requests on it per month. So you can price me at that request volume. So then you can say how much is used. And the output is a quote for the monthly cost estimate of that plan or state file. And as we saw, we can get it in a text representation or JSON. The algorithm's pretty simple here, actually. We extract all the resources from your plan and state file. We walk the price sheet and just match those resources up to anything in the price sheet. And then we walk the usage file and we match those products up to the usage. And then we just compute the price, which is it's a bit more complicated than this, but essentially it's usage time the price. This is where you can get it. This URL is going to come back in a second, so don't worry about typing it out furiously. So we separate out two operations. One is matching and the other one is pricing. And the reason we separate that out is because in order to price your resources, you might need to give OpenInfraQuote more information. For example, a common one is the region is not necessarily accessible from inside the state file or the plan file. So by default, OpenInfraQuote just says, I'm going to assume it's across all possible regions, and we'll get a range of it could cost at minimum this amount and at maximum that amount. But then you can feed it more information in the pricing step to say, well, I know it's going to be this region, so only price me at that region. So we separate them out so you can have all the matches there that are present and then choose to price it based on different scenarios or different parameters. So first step is match, where we take the price sheet and then we output the JSON. And then we price it. So the basic one, which gives you the text output, is just getting passing the matches JSON in to the price command. We can also specify the region here. That's how that would look. And we can specify an output of JSON. And we can also pass in our own custom usage, which is another JSON file. And in this way, you can say this particular S3 bucket gets this much traffic, so on. And as we saw, I just want to go over some of these. Well, we saw this in the demo, but in particular, you'll note that you get the min and max price and max diff for all these things. And like I said, OpenInfraQuote there's a lot of parameters that go into pricing something. So the more parameters you give it, the tighter this bound will get. So we can see in this case, we're giving it no extra information. And we actually have kind of like a wide bound on what the price could be. There's other things too, where even if we know what region it is, we still don't necessarily know how many requests a S3 bucket will have or how much data will be stored on it. And imagine your service becomes incredibly popular one day, it gets posted on Hacker News, and your price, obviously, that you did earlier that week doesn't know about all this extra traffic it's going to get. So that's why it's a quote. You should think about it as it giving you the direction and rough magnitude that your change is going to have. But there are external forces that are outside with the information that is present in a Terraform planner state file that impact the price. And you can tune all of those to fit exactly what you want. So we saw before the range was 126 to 381. And then we specified the region and we got a tighter bound of $127 minimum and $187 maximum. So what makes OpenInfraQuote different? There are a few other solutions out there. InfraCost is a well-known one, and then KubeCost, as well as they have an open source version called OpenCost. But what makes OpenInfraQuote different is it is 100% open source. The other ones, some parts of them are open source, or they are the smaller version of a commercial offering. And OpenInfraQuote is 100% open source, and it will always be open source. And that's one reason that we narrowed the scope down, because we want to be able to keep this pledge that we made about it being open source. Secondly, it's meant to be incredibly easy to use. So there's no server component, there's no API keys. All you need are these files that you download from the OpenInfraQuote website, and they're pretty small, they're not that large. So you do it all locally. No information ever leaves your the machine that you ran it on. Um, and so that's like so if you're privacy aware or security concerned, or you just don't want to have to add another API key you need to manage and store somewhere, then OpenInfraCode is a great choice. A core value at Terrateam is we really want to meet developers where they are, and that ideology goes into pretty much everything we do. We work very hard to make this differentiation we have called tooling versus like frameworks. We want to be able the tools to be able to fit into your existing workflow, and so you can use it how you see fit, and you don't get a workflow forced on you. And OpenInfraCode is no different. Being just a CLI, you can just put it into your existing Terraform or OpenTofu pipeline, and as long as you have access to the state or plan file, then you can add pricing to that. The design is also incredibly simple. So, for example, InfraCost parses your code and tries to understand what it does. It does some variable evaluation and all that. So it's a relatively complicated piece of software, and we decided that we wanted to make it very simple, straightforward. For example, OpenTofu is adding a lot of early variable evaluation functionality, which is great, very great from a developer perspective, but it's very hard to keep up with all that if you want to write a tool that can consume OpenTofu code. And we didn't want to have to be in a race to keep up with how much Terraform and Tofu change. We realized that the state and plan representations are pretty static. So you can add a lot of code functionality, and it doesn't really change how the plan and state files look. So that's why we chose them as inputs. It lets the you use this across multiple versions without having to worry about a new feature getting in the way of if you'll be able to price your infrastructure. Additionally, there's tools like TerraGrunt, which do a lot of complicated but useful processing beforehand. And with that, as long as you can get the plan or state file, it doesn't matter what wrapper you're using for Terraform or Tofu, you can always use OpenInfraQuote in that workflow. It's also really easy to add new resources to the price sheet. It's just a CSV. It has a pretty straightforward format. So if you have a product that you have a Terraform or Tofu provider for, and you want to be able to price it through OpenInfraQuote, then we can add that for you, no problem. It's very easy. You can even add it yourself and have your own pricing sheet that you want to use locally. So the current state is we support AWS. We don't have all of the services in there yet. We're working quite hard on getting all that there, but AWS is the primary cloud vendor that we're supporting. And we want to expand that out to GCS, Azure, and then moving on, pretty much anything that has a Terraform provider that you can infer the pricing from in some way, we would like to add to OpenInfraQuote. Just be able to price anything that you're managing through Terraform, as well as be able to integrate it into any CI/CD that you're using. That we want it to be able to be used anywhere by anyone without a lot of rigmarole in getting it going. So if they're interested, how can you help? Well, the main thing is you can run the match command against your plans and states and take that output and send it to us. Beware, there is information about your resource in there. The output is a JSON file. So look at that before you do upload it, because you just want to make sure you're not sharing anything that you would prefer not to. But all that match data really helps us improve the quality of matches that OpenInfraQuote does and give better pricing out of it. If you have a product that you know how to connect to a Terraform resource, send to us how to price that and how to connect it to a resource, and we can add it to the pricing sheet, and then it'll be in there for anyone to use. And then also, just please just use it and submit feature requests and bug reports. That's probably one of the most valuable things you can do. Pricing data is not simple. There's a lot of data wrangling. It's probably not surprising that AWS is not consistent in how it presents pricing data. So we have to take this very large inputs from AWS and GCP and Azure, and then turn them into a consistent way to figure out what Terraform resource that is. And it's a lot to work through. So if you run into any issues there, just please let us know. Or if you want some cool features, please let us know. And I'd like to thank LocalStack, not only because it made generating a lot of plans and state files very easy, rather than having to spend any money on AWS bill or just wrangle credentials and all that. You could just do it all in LocalStack locally. Really sped up development time. But also, LocalStack helped develop the tool as well. There's a few commits from various LocalStack developers in there. Also, our lead developer on it was James Dennis. He did a great job. And really, it was not only building the tool, but wrangling, like I said, all this pricing data. It was just a lot to work through. If you look at the code output of OpenInfraQuote, the actual tool is less code than all the code he had to write just to manage and discover and explore the AWS pricing data. There's just so much there, and it's a lot to understand. So with that, you can get OpenInfraQuote now. You can scan this QR code that'll bring you to that URL. And thank you very much.